What if the person you loved most turned out to be a stranger? In this gripping tale of betrayal, secrets, and revenge, a man uncovers the darkest side of his marriage, hidden within the pages of love letters meant for someone else. But what happens when he decides not to confront his wife but to play her game better than she ever could? Stick around to the end to uncover a plot twist that will leave you questioning everything about trust, love, and loyalty. Chapter 1: Cracks in the Perfect Life. My name is Jackson Moore, and up until recently, I thought I had everything. A thriving career as a defense attorney, a house that felt like a home, and a wife, Karen, who I once believed was my soulmate. We met 10 years ago, and when I first saw her, it felt like the universe had aligned perfectly. Karen wasn't just beautiful, she was magnetic. People were drawn to her, and I was the luckiest man in the room to call her mine. But something shifted over the years. At first, it was subtle a distance I chalked up to stress. Karen started working late, excusing herself from our usual Friday date nights. Her phone was always on silent, her screen tilted away from me. Little things, really. I ignored the warning signs because I wanted to believe that everything was fine. Then came the missed dinners, the vague explanations about girls' nights that never seemed to include the friends I knew. I'd wait up for her, pretending to be asleep when she finally walked in after midnight. She smelled like perfume, but not hers, a faint trace of something floral and unfamiliar. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her, but I didn't know how to ask the questions burning inside me without sounding paranoid. Instead, I buried myself in work. At least in the courtroom, things made sense. Evidence, logic, conclusions. But at home, my life felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. One evening, while Karen was out again, I decided to reorganize the shelves in our living room. It was a distraction, a way to avoid the gnawing anxiety in my chest. That's when I found it. A plain cardboard box tucked behind our wedding albums. I almost didn't open it. Inside were a stack of papers folded letters, their edges worn from being handled too many times. I pulled one out, curious. The handwriting wasn't mine. It was Karen's, but the words weren't meant for me. Oliver, the letter began. Every moment with you feels like a secret escape from a life that feels more and more like a cage. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending. I read it twice, my hands shaking so badly I nearly tore the page. Oliver. The name was like a punch to the gut. My Karen, my wife, was pouring her heart out to someone else. I closed the box and shoved it back where I found it, my mind reeling. Questions flooded my head. Who was this man? How long had this been going on? But one thought eclipsed all the others. What was I going to do about it? That night, I didn't confront Karen. I couldn't. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with betrayal. I was a man trained to spot lies, to untangle the truth from the chaos. Yet, I had missed this, right under my nose. The next morning, Karen kissed me on the cheek, as if nothing was wrong, as if she hadn't been writing love letters to another man. My heart twisted, but I smiled back, pretending everything was fine. It wasn't. Chapter 2: The Box of Secrets. I couldn't shake the image of that box. It sat there in my mind like a wound that refused to heal. After Karen left for work the next morning, I found myself drawn back to it. My hands trembled as I pulled it out from behind the wedding albums, setting it on the dining table like some kind of cursed artifact. The box contained more than just letters. There were photographs, ticket stubs, and receipts, all evidence of a life Karen was living without me. The photographs were the worst. They weren't obscene, but they didn't need to be. One showed Karen and a man I assumed was Oliver, sitting together on a park bench. Her head rested on his shoulder, her face illuminated by a smile I hadn't seen in years. I turned the photo over. A date was written on the back, the 15th of March. That was 3 months ago, the same weekend she had told me she was visiting her sister. My stomach churned. Every detail in the box was a contradiction to the life I thought we shared. The letters painted a picture of a woman I didn't recognize. In them, Karen spoke of dreams I'd never heard her mention, frustrations she had never voiced to me. She described Oliver as her escape, her sanctuary. I couldn't believe how blind I had been. I can't breathe in this life anymore, one letter read. With you, I feel alive. With him, I feel like I am drowning. Drowning. I muttered, my voice bitter. What about me? Did she think I didn't feel the weight of our life together? I paced the room, my thoughts racing. The evidence was damning, but it wasn't just anger that consumed me. It was a hollow ache. I had loved her, still loved her, despite everything. But this wasn't just a betrayal. It was an erasure of everything I thought we had built together. I thought about confronting her. I imagined her face when I threw the letters on the table, demanded answers. demanded the truth, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear of hearing the words spoken aloud, confirmation of what I already knew. Or maybe, deep down, I didn't want her to see how broken I was. Instead, I did what I do best. I started investigating. That evening, I waited for Karen to come home. I played the part of the loving husband, asking her about her day while she moved through the house like a ghost. She answered my questions absent-mindedly, her phone buzzing every so often with messages she was quick to hide. "Big case tomorrow," I said, feigning exhaustion. "I think I'll work late at the office." She barely looked up from her phone. "Okay, don't overdo it." Her indifference stung more than I wanted to admit. The next day, I skipped the office entirely. Instead, I followed Karen. She drove to a small cafe on the other side of town, the kind of place we never went to together. I parked across the street, watching as she walked in, her step lighter than I'd seen in months. Minutes later, a man joined her at the table. Oliver. He was everything I wasn't, casually dressed, with a confident smile that seemed to put Karen at ease. She laughed at something he said, her hand brushing his across the table. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. I sat there for nearly an hour, watching them like some pathetic voyeur. When they finally left, I followed at a distance. They didn't go far, just a nearby park where they strolled hand in hand, oblivious to the world or to me. It wasn't until I was back home, sitting in the dark, that the weight of it all hit me. Karen wasn't just having an affair. She was living another life, and I was the outsider looking in. But I wasn't going to let it end like this. Chapter 3. Unraveling the Threads. The morning after watching Karen and Oliver in the park, I woke with a singular purpose: to uncover every detail of their secret life. If Karen had chosen to build a new world behind my back, I was going to tear it apart, piece by piece. I started with the basics. The letters in the box gave me Oliver's full name, Oliver Bennett. A quick online search led me to his portfolio as a photographer. His work was polished, mostly lifestyle portraits and weddings. Ironically fitting, I thought, considering how much of my own marriage he'd stolen. Oliver's Instagram was a carefully curated window into his life. Among the professional posts, I found candid shots that matched the locations in Karen's letters: the lake house, the art gallery, the hiking trail. The captions were vague but suggestive. Nothing like a secret getaway to recharge, one read. Every image tightened the knot in my stomach. Next, I delved into Karen's phone records. I'd never had a reason to doubt her before, but now every number and timestamp felt like a breadcrumb leading to the truth. Oliver's number appeared often, sometimes late at night when she claimed to be working. The frequency of their contact made my head spin. It was during this phase of my investigation that I found something unexpected: a series of financial transactions. Karen had been withdrawing cash in small but consistent amounts over the past year. The totals added up to thousands of money I couldn't account for in our shared expenses. The withdrawals led me to another discovery: a rental property in Oliver's name. Karen's name wasn't on the lease, but the timing of the payments lined up with her business trips. I drove out to the address one evening, parking down the street. The house was modest but cozy, with large windows that framed the warm glow of the interior lights. I waited in the car, my pulse racing. An hour later, Karen arrived. She was carrying a bottle of wine and wore the same dress she had worn to one of our anniversaries. The sight was surreal, like watching a stranger inhabit the body of the woman I loved. Inside, I could see her and Oliver through the windows. They moved comfortably, like two people who had done this countless times. They laughed, cooked together, and kissed as if the rest of the world didn't exist. I sat there for hours, my mind swinging between rage and heartbreak. When Karen finally left, I followed her home, careful to keep my distance. She walked through our front door and climbed into bed as if she hadn't just spent the evening in another man's arms. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind raced with possibilities, scenarios, plans. Confronting her now felt like the easy way out. She'd cry, apologize, promise to change. But that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling: powerless, betrayed, exposed. The next day, I made my first move. I reached out to an old college friend, Ethan, who worked in private investigation. Ethan owed me a favor, and I cashed it in without hesitation. I handed him everything I had: photos, letters, phone records, and asked him to dig deeper. Ethan called me a week later with a bombshell. Oliver wasn't just Karen's lover. He had a history of leveraging relationships for financial gain. He'd been involved in 2 other scandals where wealthy women invested in his photography business, only to find their money gone when the relationship soured. The realization hit me like a freight train. Karen wasn't just cheating, she was being conned. The money she'd been withdrawing wasn't for vacations or gifts, it was funding Oliver's lifestyle. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity for her, but it was quickly snuffed out by a colder, more calculated resolve. Karen had chosen this path, and now I was going to make sure she walked it to the end. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice. Chapter 4. Playing the long game. The thing about betrayal is that it sharpens your instincts. It teaches you patience, forces you to think several moves ahead. By the time I learned about Oliver's schemes, my anger had crystallized into something far more dangerous strategy. Karen had no idea that I knew. Every morning she kissed me on the cheek, wished me a good day, and left for work. She was playing her game, and now so was I. My first step was subtle. I began shifting our finances. As a defense attorney, I understood the importance of evidence, of timing. Quietly, I moved the bulk of our shared savings into an account under my name. I left just enough to make it seem untouched, something Karen wouldn't notice unless she looked closely. I also started planting small seeds of doubt. On days when Karen was particularly cheerful, I'd casually mention her late nights or her business trips, phrasing it like an innocent question. Her reactions were telling. She'd stiffen for a moment, then recover, offering rehearsed answers. One evening, I decided to test her further. Over dinner, I mentioned that I'd been offered a high-profile case that would require me to travel for a few weeks. Her eyes lit up, but she tried to hide it behind a forced expression of concern. "That's great for your career," she said, almost too eagerly. I knew what she was thinking. My absence would give her free rein to see Oliver without sneaking around. In the meantime, Ethan's investigation uncovered more about Oliver. He wasn't just a con artist, he was a master manipulator. He had a habit of preying on women who felt unfulfilled, offering them the excitement and validation they craved. It was a textbook pattern, and Karen had fallen for it completely. With Ethan's help, I also learned that Oliver's photography business was on shaky ground. His debts were piling up, and Karen's withdrawals weren't enough to keep him afloat. This gave me an idea, a way to dismantle their relationship and ruin Oliver's plans in one move. I started by posing as a potential client, reaching out to Oliver for a photo shoot. Under a fake name, I booked one of his highest priced packages, paying the deposit with a burner account. The goal wasn't just to waste his time, but to gain access to his business records. During our consultation, I played the part of a wealthy but clueless entrepreneur, asking him about his process, his equipment, his investments. Oliver was charming, confident, even likable if you didn't know better. But I wasn't there to make friends. A few days later, Ethan delivered the final piece of the puzzle, proof that Oliver was using Karen's money to pay off his creditors. It was enough to destroy him, but I wasn't ready to strike just yet. Instead, I focused on Karen. I needed her to dig herself deeper, to make mistakes she couldn't undo. One night, as she was getting ready to go out, I casually asked, "Big plans tonight?" She hesitated, just for a second. "Just meeting the girls, the usual." I nodded, hiding my smirk. "Have fun." An hour later, I followed her to Oliver's rental house. This time, I didn't just watch. I parked down the street, stepped out of my car, and took a series of photos of them through the window. The images were damning. Karen sitting on Oliver's lap, laughing, kissing him. By the time I got home, I had everything I needed to destroy both of them. But instead of feeling triumphant, I felt empty. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming control, about proving to myself that I wasn't the fool they thought I was. Karen came home late that night, slipping into bed without a word. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. The game wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. Chapter 5. Setting the trap. Revenge, I've learned, isn't about the moment of triumph. It's about the build-up, the careful construction of a scenario where your target has no way out. That's what I focused on, now building the perfect trap for Karen and Oliver. I spent the next week laying groundwork. Every evening, I watched Karen leave the house, sometimes heading to Oliver's rental, sometimes to places they must have thought were safe. I followed her discreetly, documenting everything. It wasn't hard, they were careless, drunk on the thrill of secrecy. At the same time, I began testing Karen's boundaries. One morning over breakfast, I asked, "What's the name of the friend you've been seeing so often? I don't think I've met her." Her fork froze midair. "It's, Melanie? You've met her at the Christmas party, remember?" I nodded slowly, pretending to recall. "Oh, right, Melanie." She exhaled, visibly relieved. But her lie only fueled my determination. By now, I had a timeline of her affair, detailed down to dates and locations. But I wasn't just collecting evidence for a confrontation, I was preparing to dismantle their lives piece by piece. The next phase involved Oliver. Using the fake identity I'd established during our photoshoot consultation, I scheduled another meeting, this time to discuss a potential investment in his business. He took the bait without hesitation. We met at a coffee shop, and I played the role of an enthusiastic but naive investor. "Your work is amazing," I gushed. "I could see myself putting serious money into expanding your reach." Oliver's eyes lit up at the mention of money. "That's exactly what I've been looking for, someone who believes in the vision." I nodded, feigning excitement. "But I'd need to see your financials, of course, just to make sure everything's solid before we move forward." He hesitated for a fraction of a second before smiling. "Of course. I can send over some documents later this week." The fool. The documents he sent were a goldmine. They confirmed everything Ethan had uncovered: unpaid debts, shady transactions, and an over-reliance on personal contributions from unnamed sources. Karen's withdrawals were there too, hidden under vague descriptors like partner support. I could have exposed him right then and there, but I wasn't ready. There was still more to do. Karen, meanwhile, remained oblivious. If anything, she seemed happier, more relaxed. She probably thought I was too distracted by work to notice her lies. One night, as she got ready to leave, I tried something new. "Hey," I said casually, "you've been going out a lot lately. Is everything okay?" Her hand paused on the doorknob. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Just seems like you are different lately." She turned to me, her expression carefully neutral. "It's just work stress. I've been trying to unwind." "Unwind," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. She offered me a tight smile before leaving. I watched her drive away, knowing exactly where she was going. The final piece of the trap fell into place when Ethan uncovered something critical. Oliver had a criminal record. It wasn't major charges of fraud and embezzlement that had been settled out of court, but it was enough to bury him if made public. I decided it was time to act. First, I sent an anonymous tip to a local journalist, complete with copies of Oliver's financial records and his criminal history. I knew they'd run with the story; it was too juicy to ignore. Next, I prepared my evidence against Karen. The photos, the letters, the bank transactions, they formed an airtight case. I compiled everything into a neat folder, labeled "For Karen's Eyes Only." Then I waited. The night of the reveal was one I'll never forget. Karen came home late, as usual, and found me sitting at the dining table, the folder in front of me. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wary. "Sit down," I said, my tone calm but firm. She hesitated, then obeyed. I pushed the folder toward her. "Open it." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the contents. Her face went pale, then red, then pale again. "What is this?" she whispered, barely able to look at me. "It's everything you've been hiding from me," I replied. "Everything I've been watching, documenting, waiting for the right moment to confront." Her eyes filled with tears. "Jackson, I can explain." "Don't," I interrupted. "This isn't about explanations. This is about the truth. And now you are going to live with it." Chapter 6. The fallout begins. Karen sat frozen, her hands gripping the folder as if it might disappear if she held on tight enough. I leaned back in my chair, watching the reality of her actions sink in. The air between us felt thick, charged with the weight of everything unspoken. "You've been following me?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Following you, tracking your lies, documenting your betrayal," I said, each word deliberate. "I am not the fool you think I am, Karen." She tried to compose herself, closing the folder and pushing it away. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she stammered. "It's not what you think, I just—" "Don't insult me with excuses." I cut her off. "I know about Oliver. I know about the money, the lies, everything. So spare me the act." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. Her sorrow seemed hollow, like the performance of someone caught in their own web. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I continued, my voice rising. "You didn't just cheat on me, Karen. You dismantled our life, brick by brick, and handed the pieces to a con artist." Her head snapped up at that. "What are you talking about?" I almost laughed. "You don't even know who he really is, do you? Oliver Bennett isn't just some charming photographer. He's a professional liar, a fraud who's been bleeding you dry while feeding you empty promises." Karen shook her head, disbelief etched on her face. "No, that's not true. He wouldn't." I cut her off by tossing a stack of papers onto the table copies of Oliver's criminal record, financial records, and the journalist's article that had gone live just hours earlier. "Take a good look," I said coldly. "This is the man you threw everything away for." She picked up the papers with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the damning evidence. Her expression shifted from denial to horror as the truth set in. "No," she murmured. "This can't be real. He told me." "Let me guess," I interrupted. "He's misunderstood. He's a victim of circumstance. He loves you." I leaned forward, my voice dripping with contempt. "You were nothing but a means to an end for him, Karen. Just another mark." She dropped the papers, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know." "Maybe not," I said, standing up. "But ignorance doesn't absolve you. You chose this. You chose him." Over the next few days, the fallout spread like wildfire. The journalist's article gained traction, exposing Oliver's scams to the public. His photography business was effectively dead, and his reputation was in ruins. Karen tried calling him, but the number was disconnected. I watched her spiral, pacing the house with her phone clutched in her hand, as if willing him to reappear. But Oliver was gone, just like Ethan and I predicted. Karen's attempts to reconcile with me were equally futile. "Jackson," she pleaded one night, "I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but we can fix this. We can rebuild." I looked at her, the woman I had once loved, and felt nothing but cold detachment. "T here is no we anymore, Karen. You destroyed that the moment you decided I wasn't enough." She cried, begged, promised to change, but her words were meaningless to me now. The Karen I thought I knew no longer existed. In the weeks that followed, I finalized the steps to separate our lives completely. Divorce papers were drawn up, and I made sure the financial settlement favored me. Karen was left with little more than the house, which now felt like an empty shell of what it once was. As for me, I moved forward. The anger and betrayal no longer consumed me. Instead, they became fuel for a future I was determined to reclaim on my terms. Chapter 7. Oliver's Final Move. Just when I thought the dust had settled, Oliver reappeared. It started with an anonymous email in my inbox one morning. The subject line read, "You've been busy, haven't you?" My stomach tightened as I opened it. Inside was a single sentence. "You think you've won, but you've underestimated me." Attached was a photo of Karen and me, taken years ago at a charity gala. The image sent a chill down my spine, and not because of what it showed, but because it confirmed that Oliver wasn't gone. He was watching. I forwarded the email to Ethan immediately, along with the email address it had come from. Within hours, Ethan called. "It's a burner account," he said. But whoever sent it didn't cover their tracks well enough. The IP traces back to a motel in the city. Oliver wasn't just watching, he was close. I decided not to tell Karen. She had been sinking deeper into despair since Oliver's disappearance, alternating between tearful apologies and long, vacant silences. I didn't need her spiraling any further, and frankly, I didn't trust her not to tip him off. Instead, I went to the motel myself. Ethan insisted on coming along, and we staked out the location from a car parked a block away. It wasn't long before we spotted him. Oliver looked nothing like the polished man I'd seen in photos. His suit was wrinkled, his face unshaven. He moved with the nervous energy of someone constantly looking over their shoulder. "Looks like the fallout hit him harder than we thought," Ethan said, snapping pictures from the passenger seat. I stared at Oliver, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to confront him then and there, to demand answers, to end this once and for all. But something stopped me. "He's desperate," I said finally, "and desperate people make mistakes." Over the next few days, Ethan and I kept tabs on Oliver. He seemed to be living day to day, visiting pawn shops, making frantic phone calls, meeting with shady-looking individuals. It didn't take long to figure out his plan. He was trying to rebuild his scheme, targeting new victims. But Oliver wasn't as careful as he thought. Ethan managed to intercept one of his messages to a potential client posing as a wealthy woman interested in investing in his business. We set the trap carefully, arranging a meeting at a high-end cafe. Ethan's contact, a friend in law enforcement, posed as the mark. Hidden cameras were set up, and I watched from a nearby car as Oliver fell for the bait. He was smooth, confident, spitting the same lies he'd used on Karen. But as the meeting progressed, his desperation became apparent. He pushed too hard, promising too much, and when he finally mentioned the need for a good faith investment, the trap snapped shut. The police moved in, arresting him on the spot. I stepped out of the car watching as they cuffed him. For a moment, our eyes met. "You," he snarled, realization dawning on his face. I smiled coldly. "You should have stayed gone, Oliver." That night, I returned home and found Karen sitting on the couch, staring at the same unopened bottle of wine she had brought to Oliver's house months ago. She looked up at me, her eyes hollow. "He's really gone, isn't he?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I nodded. "He's in custody. He won't hurt anyone else." She exhaled shakily, tears streaming down her face. "I was so stupid, Jackson. I believed every word he said." I sat down across from her, the distance between us feeling more like a chasm. "It wasn't just him, Karen. You chose to believe him. You chose to betray me." She nodded, wiping her face. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." For the first time in weeks, I felt a twinge of something, maybe pity, maybe closure. But forgiveness? That was something I couldn't offer. "I hope you learn from this," I said quietly, standing up, "because I am done carrying the weight of your choices." The next morning, I left the house for good, a signed set of divorce papers waiting on the dining table. Karen didn't try to stop me. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotion: sadness for what we'd lost, relief that it was finally over, and a sense of triumph that I had survived it all. Oliver was gone. Karen was a ghost of her former self. And me, I was free. Chapter 8, Rebuilding Myself. Leaving wasn't easy. Even after everything Karen had done, the house still felt like a part of me. The memories there weren't all bad there, were years of laughter, of love, of what I thought was happiness. But walking away felt necessary, like shedding a skin that no longer fit. I moved into a small apartment downtown. It was nothing fancy, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and an outdated kitchen, but it was mine. The first night, I sat on the floor with a takeout pizza and a beer, staring at the empty walls. For the first time in years, I felt alone. But solitude wasn't the same as loneliness. I threw myself into work, taking on more cases than ever. There was something cathartic about fighting for other people, about channeling my anger and betrayal into a purpose. My colleagues noticed the change. "You are on fire lately," one of them said after a particularly grueling case. I smiled, but it was a distant kind of satisfaction. Winning felt good, but it didn't fill the void Karen and Oliver had left behind. Ethan checked in regularly, though he never pushed me to talk about Karen or Oliver. Instead, we'd grab a drink or catch a game, pretending that my life hadn't imploded. It was exactly what I needed: distraction without pity. "You ever think about dating again?" he asked one night, a few months after I'd moved out. I laughed, shaking my head. "Not even close. I've had my fill of lies and betrayal for a lifetime." Ethan smirked. "Not everyone's like Karen, you know. There are good people out there." "Maybe," I said, swirling the whiskey in my glass. "But right now, I am good with just me." And it was true. For the first time in years, I was learning how to be alone, and not in a lonely way, but in a self-sufficient way. Meanwhile, Karen's life continued to unravel. Mutual friends told me she'd sold the house, unable to keep up with the mortgage on her own. She was renting a small condo across town, working long hours to pay off the debts Oliver had left her with. I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. But I also didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Her misery didn't undo my pain. It didn't make me whole again. One evening, as I was packing up after a long day at work, I received a call from an unknown number. "Hello?" I answered, my voice wary. "Jackson." The voice on the other end was weak, almost unrecognizable. It was Karen. I needed to say thank you," she said after a long pause, "for what you did with Oliver, for stopping him. He would have ruined me." "He already did," I replied, my tone flat. There was silence on the other end, then a soft, broken laugh. "I deserve that. I deserve worse." "Why are you calling me, Karen?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I guess I just wanted to hear your voice, to know you are okay." "I am," I said firmly. "And you will be too, but not because of me. That's something you'll have to figure out on your own." I hung up before she could respond. That night, I sat on the balcony of my apartment, looking out over the city. The scars Karen and Oliver had left were still there, but they didn't ache the way they used to. I realized then that rebuilding wasn't just about moving on. It was about reclaiming the pieces of myself I'd lost, about finding strength in the ruins. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. Chapter 9. An Unexpected Encounter. Months passed, and the chaos of my past began to fade into the background. My days were filled with work, my evenings with quiet routines that felt steady, almost peaceful. But as much as I tried to move forward, life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It was a crisp autumn evening when I ran into her. I was standing in line at a bookstore, a coffee in one hand and a book in the other, when I heard someone say my name. Jackson? I turned, and there she was. At first, I didn't recognize her. Her hair was shorter, and her makeup was lighter, almost non-existent. She looked different, softer. Karen? I said, my voice even. She smiled nervously, clutching a novel against her chest. I didn't think I'd see you here. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to turn around and pretend she wasn't there. Another part of me was curious, what was she doing here? How had she been surviving the mess she'd created? Do you live around here now? She asked, filling the silence. I nodded. Yeah, a few blocks away. Her eyes flicked to the book in my hand. You are reading now? I don't think I ever saw you with a book before. I smirked faintly. A lot has changed. Her smile faltered, and for a moment, she looked like she might cry. Yeah, she said softly. It has. Against my better judgment, we ended up sitting at a small table in the cafe section of the bookstore. The conversation was stilted at first, full of awkward pauses and half-finished sentences. But eventually, the tension eased. Karen told me about her new Joba receptionist position at a small clinic. It's not glamorous, but it's steady, she said. I've been trying to rebuild piece by piece. I nodded, sipping my coffee. That's good. You need that stability. She hesitated, then looked at me with those familiar eyes, the ones I used to trust implicitly. I've been in therapy, she admitted, trying to figure out why I did the things I did, why I ruined everything. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Apologies and explanations couldn't erase the damage she'd done. Karen took a deep breath. I know I can't undo what happened, but I wanted to tell you I am sorry, truly, for everything. You didn't deserve any of it. Her words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity, and for the first time, I felt a sliver of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Forgiveness. It's not about what I deserved, I said finally. It's about the choices you made. And now, it's about the choices you are making to fix yourself. That's what matters. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I am trying, Jackson. I really am. We didn't linger long. As we stood to leave, Karen hesitated. Do you think we could ever be friends? I shook my head, though my voice was gentle. I don't think so, Karen. Tea here is too much history. But I do wish you the best. Her shoulders sagged, but she managed a small smile. That's more than I deserve. Thank you. As I walked away, I felt lighter somehow, as if a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying had finally lifted. That night, I reflected on the encounter. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it didn't mean reconciliation. But it did mean letting go of the bitterness that had chained me to the past. Karen's chapter in my life was over, but I'd written a new one for myself, a chapter of growth, strength, and hope. Chapter 10, The Strength to Let Go. The morning after my unexpected encounter with Karen, I woke up feeling different. For months, my emotions had swung between anger and indifference, with little room for anything else. But now, there was clarity. Forgiveness had been a decision, not for her sake, but for mine. I was done carrying the weight of her betrayal. That day, I did something I'd been avoiding since the divorce. I opened the box of keepsakes I'd taken from the house before leaving. Inside were fragments of a life I barely recognized anymore: concert tickets, postcards from vacations, a stack of old photos. I found myself staring at one picture in particular, Karen and me at the beach, smiling like the world couldn't touch us. I barely remembered that day, and yet it felt like staring at strangers. I set the picture aside and rummaged deeper until I found it the wedding photo album. For a moment, I hesitated, the sting of her betrayal threatening to resurface. But then I opened it. There were the letters, the ones I'd found all those months ago. I picked them up, flipping through the pages, the words that had once shattered me now feeling strangely hollow. They no longer had power over me. With a deep breath, I took the letters and the photograph to the balcony. I lit a match and watched as the flames consumed them, turning the remnants of my past to ash. That evening, Ethan dropped by unannounced with a six-pack of beer and a mischievous grin. You'll thank me for this later, he said, pulling me out of my apartment and into the city. I rolled my eyes but let him lead the way. We ended up at a jazz baronne of those dimly lit, smoky places that felt like stepping back in time. Ethan nudged me toward the bar, ordering us drinks. "You've been hiding too long," he said, raising his glass. "Time to rejoin the land of the living." I smirked, taking a sip of my drink. "I am not hiding. I've just had enough drama for a lifetime." "Fair," he said, glancing toward the stage. "But life's not all drama. Sometimes it's just music and good whiskey." I couldn't argue with that. As the night went on, I found myself relaxing, letting go of the tension I'd been carrying for so long. The music washed over me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt genuinely at ease. That's when I noticed her. She was sitting at the other end of the bar, sipping a glass of red wine and watching the band with a quiet intensity. She wasn't flashy or overly done up, just natural and elegant in a way that drew my attention. Ethan caught me staring and smirked. "See something you like?" "Shut up," I muttered, turning back to my drink. But as the night wore on, our paths crossed. She bumped into me as she made her way to the bar, apologizing with a warm smile. "No harm done," I said, surprised by how easy the words came. She introduced herself, Lila, and we struck up a conversation. It was light, effortless, with none of the weight or pretense I'd grown so used to. By the time I left the bar, I wasn't thinking about Karen or Oliver or the chaos of the past year. For the first time, I was thinking about the future. Chapter 11. A New Beginning. A week after meeting Leela, I found myself staring at my phone, debating whether to call her. It wasn't fear holding me back, not exactly. It was the realization that reaching out meant stepping fully into a new chapter of my life. Eventually, I pushed aside my doubts and dialed. "Hi, Lila," I said when she answered. "It's Jackson, from the jazz bar." "Jackson?" she said warmly, as if she'd been expecting the call. "I was wondering if I'd hear from you." That simple acknowledgement made me smile. We talked for an hour, and by the end of the call, we'd agreed to meet for coffee. The cafe was small and quiet, tucked away from the bustle of the city. When I arrived, Lila was already there, sitting by the window with a book in her hands. She looked up as I approached, her smile making the sunlight streaming through the glass seem even brighter. "Good book?" I asked as I sat down. "It is," she said, closing it, "but I think this might be more interesting." Her confidence was refreshing, a stark contrast to the insecurities I'd grown used to navigating with Karen. Over coffee, we talked about everything: our jobs, favorite books, travel dreams. She had a way of listening that made me feel heard, truly heard for the first time in years. "What about you?" she asked eventually, tilting her head slightly. "What's your story?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to share, but something about her presence made it easy to be honest. I told her about my work, my apartment, the things I was passionate about. I didn't mention Karen or Oliver, not yet. As the weeks went by, Lila and I grew closer. She was patient, never prying into my past, but always encouraging me to open up when I was ready. And eventually, I did. One evening, as we walked through a park, I told her everything. About Karen, Oliver, the betrayal, the divorce, and the fire it had taken to rebuild myself. She listened quietly, her hand brushing against mine as we walked. When I finished, she stopped and turned to face me. "That's a lot to go through," she said softly. "But the fact that you are here, standing in front of me, says a lot about your strength." Her words struck something deep within me. For so long, I'd seen myself as a victim of what had happened, defined by the betrayal and the pain. But Lila didn't see me that way. Months turned into a year, and with Lila, I found something I thought I'd lost forever: trust. She didn't fill the void Karen and Oliver had left behind. She helped me realize there was no void at all, just room to grow. Karen, meanwhile, became a distant memory. Occasionally, I'd hear about her through mutual acquaintances. She was still working at the clinic, still piecing her life together. But I no longer felt anger or pity, just indifference. Oliver's name rarely came up. The last I'd heard, he was serving time for fraud, his charm finally failing him in the face of cold, hard justice. One evening, as Lila and I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker below, she turned to me with a curious smile. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not the way I used to. It doesn't weigh me down anymore." She nodded, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Good. Because the past might shape us, but it doesn't have to define us." In that moment, I realized how far I'd come. The betrayal that had once consumed me was now just a chapter in my story, a chapter that had ended. And as I sat there holding Lila close, I understood something else. The most important story wasn't the one I'd left behind. It was the one I was writing now, one moment at a time. Betrayal can shatter even the strongest foundations, but it doesn't have to destroy you. This is a story about loss, redemption, and finding the strength to start over. What would you do if faced with betrayal? Would you seek revenge, or would you find a way to let go? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that make you think, question, and reflect on the complexities of life.